A new vision for a post-Brexit Britain. The Chancellor outlines his plans to boost the economy. Philip Hammond says spending on new homes and transport will be his priority. Trying to balance the books, he says, can wait.
Commitment is to build a country and an economy that works for everyone, to raise our living standards and grow our national wealth, not just for today, but for future generations too.
As the pound drops to a three-year low against the euro, we'll be assessing the government's plans for a post-Brexit Britain. Also this lunchtime, Hungary's Prime Minister declares victory in a referendum on EU migrant quotas, but a low turnout means it probably won't count. A shock result in Colombia as voters reject a peace deal reached last week with FARC rebels. Robbed at gunpoint, reality TV star Kim Kardashian flies home after armed men dressed as police officers rob her in a Paris hotel. Emotional scenes as Monty Python star Terry Jones collects a BAFTA award as he battles with dementia.
We'd just like to say thank you for everyone. I know it's a great honour for Dad to win this award, and just struggles we're having at the moment. It's a bit hard, but we're so proud of him. Thank you.
In the south, a man's arrested as a woman in her 20s is found dead in a house in Bournemouth. And helping an endangered species survive, treating leprosy in Brownsea Island's red squirrels.
Good afternoon and welcome to the BBC News at 1. The Chancellor, Philip Hammond, has warned that the economy is facing a daunting challenge as Britain negotiates its exit from the European Union. Speaking at the Tory party conference in Birmingham, he said the Brexit process would be complex and would need meticulous planning and steely determination. He said a plan to balance the books, though important, would have to wait. Our political correspondent Carol Walker sent this report.
The new Prime Minister and Chancellor were at a building site this morning, treading a familiar route for politicians keen to demonstrate the practical steps they're taking to build a strong economy. But the strategy is new. The plan to get the economy back into surplus by the end of this decade has been scrapped. In his conference speech, the Chancellor said the Brexit vote had created turbulence and uncertainty.
The fiscal policies that George Osborne set out were the right ones for that time. But when times change, we must change with them. So we will no longer target a surplus at the end of this Parliament. But make no mistake, the task of fiscal consolidation must continue.
And he announced a further initiative to help businesses worried about future funding.
I've already guaranteed the funding for projects signed prior to this year's autumn statement. Today, I can go further. The Treasury will offer a guarantee to bidders whose projects meet UK priorities and value for money criteria, that if they secure multi-year EU funding before we exit, we will guarantee those payments after Britain has left the EU, protecting British jobs and businesses after Brexit.
Philip Hammond's warned that the uncertainty during the Brexit negotiations will mean a roller coaster ride for the economy, and says he needs the flexibility to respond. It's not an end to austerity, but the Chancellor will borrow more to spend on what he calls carefully targeted projects to protect jobs and improve infrastructure.
It's pretty clear that we wouldn't reach the balanced budget target by 2020 as George Osborne had planned, because the economy will very likely do less well than he'd hoped. In those circumstances, it will be quite remarkable actually to impose more cuts or tax increases in order to get there. So yes, I think it is the right thing to do.
Today, the Chancellor announced a £3 billion fund to help build more than 25,000 new homes. Those who will benefit welcomed the new approach.
This is a significant investment and real backing for small house builders in the sector. It's very important that the government looks to small house builders rather than just the big developers, so this is a really strong signal. There are extra costs associated with small groups of units in the housing development market, and actually the announcement today should go some way to alleviate that.
Thank you.
But failing to set a target for getting rid of the nation's debts could increase the uncertainty, and the Chancellor will be under pressure to give more details in his autumn statement. Carol Walker, BBC News, Birmingham.
Let's speak to our assistant political editor, Norman Smith. His predecessor wasn't there, Philip Hammond's predecessor. A cynic could be forgiven for asking George who?
Well, Simon, how many conferences like this have we been to where we've heard George Osborne or David Cameron talking about the need to tackle the deficit, to balance the books, to mend the roof while the sun is shining? Well, no more. Philip Hammond has signalled a very different approach. There will be no specific target date for paying off the deficit. Indeed, Mr. Hammond suggested he was going to borrow more money for infrastructure, for housing, to keep the economy ticking over. Now, in part, that simply reflects economic reality, that it's proving very difficult to pay off the deficit. In part, it reflects the fact that Theresa May has proved more than willing to abandon key planks of the Cameron-Osborne agenda. But in part, too, it reflects, I think, growing nervousness in the Treasury about the impact of Brexit. Mr. Hammond warning today about economic turbulence, about the roller coaster impact on public confidence. And he said people did not vote for Brexit to become poorer. So to avoid that pain, to avoid any potential backlash against Brexit, Mr. Hammond has decided to ease off on austerity.
Norman, thank you very much for that. Well, our economics correspondent Andy Verity is here with me now. He said quite clearly, Philip Hammond, that there were choppy waters ahead, and the money market's already pointing out there are lots of difficulties already.
Yeah, very much so, Simon, actually. If you look at the pound's value, unfortunately, perhaps for Mr. Hammond, it slid a little bit since he started speaking. It was already on the slide since yesterday when we had the announcement that Article 50 would be triggered by March at the latest. The markets are taking a view that that means we may not be members of the European single market, and therefore that might be bad for economic growth. So to some extent, what Philip Hammond was trying to do here was to show that they did have a plan for growth, that it wasn't just about deficit reduction. Now, he rode away slightly, of course, we know, from what George Osborne has been saying, that the deficit must be reduced by the end of this Parliament. He confirmed that he's ditching that target. On the one hand, he was saying it's unsustainable and unfair to have that level of debt, but slightly more sustainable, clearly, by implication, than George Osborne thought it was.
Talking of improving infrastructure, of spending more, is there new money?
Well, if you actually look at the numbers, we see £5 billion a fund for new housing measures. Now, $3 billion of that has already been announced. There's another $2 billion in what's called the Accelerated Construction Scheme. This is all part of the plan to get brownfield sites on stream for places like London, which are starved of housing. Now, if you're a developer, you can't very easily make a profit with a brownfield site, because before you can start building houses, you suddenly have to get rid of all the girders, all the pipeworks, the factories that may have been there. That's expensive and can reduce your profits. What the government's saying here is they'll spend £2 billion helping the development companies do that. So yeah, that will help a bit, but £2 billion in an overall public spending budget of more than 700 billion is not necessarily enough to make a difference to economic growth. And that was reflected again in what we've got with the pound-dollar relationship, 128.65 the last time I looked. That's pretty much as low as it's been for a while. If it gets any lower, it will be a new 30-year low.
Andy, thank you very much. Andy Verity. The Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban has declared yesterday's referendum on the EU's migrant policy a success, even though the low turnout has rendered the result invalid. Only 44% of voters took part. That's well below the 50% threshold. But of those, 98% rejected plans for the mandatory resettlement of migrants. Our correspondent Nick Thorpe sent this report.
These are the kind of people the Hungarian government wants to keep out of Europe. Migrants waiting patiently at Hungary's border fence with Serbia. The Hungarian government does allow 30 asylum seekers in each day on humanitarian grounds. Sunday's referendum was about making sure that the European Union doesn't fly any more in from elsewhere. Voting at Sunday's referendum was, however, sluggish. Among those who did cast a valid vote, however, support for the government's position was overwhelming.
I think every country have their own right to decide who to invite to their countries or who not.
Last year, nearly 400,000 migrants and refugees passed through Hungary on their way to Western Europe. This year, the figure is under 30,000. They've been deterred by all the measures against them taken by countries along their route. The Hungarian Prime Minister, Viktor Orbán, claimed victory in the referendum despite the poor turnout and the high number of spoiled ballots.
We can be proud. I feel we can be proud that as the first and so far the only EU member state, Hungarians gave their view on the migration issue. It was right and honest this way.
Opposition parties too have claimed victory as they campaigned for people to boycott the vote. Whatever the spin he puts on this referendum, this is a disappointing result for Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. But he seems determined to battle on regardless. He wants to be a champion for all those in the EU who want the Union to be not a safe haven, but a strong fortress. Nick Thorpe, BBC News, Budapest.
The people of Colombia have dealt a blow to efforts to end the 52-year-old war with the FARC rebel group. By the narrowest of margins, voters rejected a peace deal agreed last week, raising the prospect of a return to violence. But the country's president said a ceasefire would stay in place. FARC also said it remained committed to peace. Our correspondent Richard Galpin reports.
The Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or FARC, the armed wing of the Communist Party, began their fight against the government in the 1960s. Based in the countryside, it was a rebellion against searing inequality in the country. But more recently, they'd come under increasing pressure from the Colombian military, which is backed by the United States. So, after 4 years of negotiations, the Colombian president, Juan Manuel Santos, and rebel leaders finally signed a peace deal a week ago. But before it could come into force, there first had to be a referendum to ratify it. And with the results now in, it's emerged voters have, by the narrowest of margins, rejected the peace agreement, sparking a political crisis.
I won't give up. I'll continue the search for peace until the last moment of my mandate, because that's the way to leave a better country for our children.
It seems those who voted against the agreement felt the deal was too lenient, with no punishment for any rebels guilty of crimes. Instead, it would have allowed the FARC rebels to compete in presidential and parliamentary elections, and would have given them 10 unelected seats in Congress until 2026. All this despite admitting they trafficked drugs and violated human rights. Even with the shock result of the referendum, the rebel leadership, like the government, say they still want peace.
The Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia maintains its desire for peace and reiterates its commitment to use only words as weapons to construct the future.
So for now at least, it seems Colombia is not about to descend into war again. But the dilemma is how to find a way around this referendum result. Richard Galpin, BBC News.
The reality TV star Kim Kardashian has been held up at gunpoint by masked men. She was in a hotel room in Paris. Her spokesman said the men were dressed as police officers. She's said to be badly shaken but physically unharmed. Jewellery worth millions of pounds is said to have been taken. Our correspondent Amy Cole has the latest.
Her mega-rich lifestyle and famous family make her a target. In the early hours of this morning, Kim Kardashian was robbed at gunpoint at this luxury residence in Paris. It's understood a night watchman was handcuffed and 5 men dressed as police wearing masks stormed her apartment and held her at gunpoint before ransacking it and fleeing. She was left tied up in the bathroom.
I'm sorry, there's a family emergency. I have to stop the show.
Kim's husband, rapper Kanye West, was on stage in New York at the time and abruptly ended his set. Kim's in Paris for Fashion Week. This was actress Salma Hayek's reaction.
Important is that she's okay.
The thieves are said to have stolen mostly jewellery worth several £million. Lee Turner has been a close protection security guard to the rich and famous for more than 10 years. He says attacks like this make his job harder.
We end up, employing a lot more staff these days, especially for people like herself, because we're just always on the lookout for potential risks.
Kim stayed quiet on social media, but TV host James Corden has berated people for making fun of her. He tweeted, "People making jokes about Kim Kardashian tonight would do well to remember that she's a mother, a daughter, a wife, a friend. Be nice or shut up." It's not known whether the star's 2 children were with her. A spokesperson said that Kim was left badly shaken but physically unharmed. Amy Cole, BBC News.
Gareth Southgate, the interim England boss, says he needs a team full of leaders as they look to move forward following the departure of manager Sam Allardyce. He confirmed that Wayne Rooney will remain as national team captain, describing the forward as the outstanding leader in the group. Well, our sports correspondent Katie Gornall is at the National Football Centre in Burton-upon-Trent for us. Katie.
Well, Simon, leadership was a word that Southgate used repeatedly as he spoke of how to pick up the pieces following what's been a very difficult week for the FA. He spoke very well, he seemed relaxed, but he knows that the hard work starts now and that he'll need to restore some integrity to the role of England manager following the unexpected departure of Sam Allardyce on Tuesday. It's becoming an all-too-familiar sight for English football. Gareth Southgate is England's 3rd manager in just over 3 months. And beneath the smile is an understanding of the turmoil that brought him here. Last summer, it was thought English football had reached its lowest ebb, crashing out to Iceland at the Euros. But then last week, a whirlwind hit the FA. On Tuesday, they decided Sam Allardyce's position as manager was untenable after he made a series of controversial comments to undercover reporters. 67 days into his dream job, he was gone. Now the FA had to look to someone else to steady the ship.
When I came in here Tuesday morning, I didn't expect to be in charge of the team at 6 o'clock at night. So things happened so quickly. It was a moment to step up and put myself forward as the leader of this group.
And when asked about alleged corruption in football, this was Southgate's response.
I'm involved in a sport that I love and an industry that at times I don't like. And really outside of that, the detail of what happened last week, I'm not too au fait with.
The former defender is familiar with the national setup. He won 57 caps for England, famously missing a penalty against Germany in Euro '96. He took up his first role in the dugout at Middlesbrough when he moved up from club captain to manager, keeping them in the Premier League for 2 seasons before relegation. In 2013, he was appointed as manager of England's under-21s, and when Allardyce resigned, he was given the top job by the FA on a temporary basis. But does he want to stick around?
I think we've got 7 weeks to prepare the team in the best possible fashion. And after that 7 weeks, then everybody will take a step back and have time to think a bit clearer about what the future might be for any number of different reasons.
Southgate will now take charge of England's final 4 matches of 2016 before pondering what the future might hold. Well, the players arrive here at St George's Park tomorrow, and Southgate's immediate task will be to prepare them for the game against Malta at Wembley at the weekend. Now, he refused to be drawn on his long-term future, but there is a view that this is Southgate's job to lose if he wants it. And if he does well over the next 4 games, then he may well be redirecting his ambitions towards Russia and the World Cup in 2018, Simon.
Katie Gornall, thank you very much. It's coming up to 1:20 our top story this lunchtime. A new vision for a post-Brexit Britain. The Chancellor outlines his plans to boost the economy. He says trying to balance the books can wait. Still to come, first Jamaica, now Hurricane Matthew heads towards Haiti with winds of more than 150 miles an hour.
In South Today, coming up at 1:30, 2 illegal immigrants found in a container during a crackdown on port security. And helping an endangered species survive, treating leprosy in Brownsea Island's red squirrels.
Every year in Africa, between 30,000 and 40,000 elephants are killed, poached for their ivory. The situation is now so dire, some experts are even questioning whether these creatures will still be around in a generation. And it's not just poaching that poses a threat. Africa's growing population is also reducing the animal's habitat. But as our Africa correspondent Alistair Leithhead reports, even the experts disagree over how to protect the continent's elephants.
Africa's elephants are being killed by poachers at an astonishing rate. Almost a third have been lost in 7 years. Conservationists are trying absolutely anything to try and save them, including this. Arrow is the first skydiving anti-poaching dog. Trainers in South Africa are experimenting with new ways of getting rangers onto the trail to stop poachers and traffickers in their tracks. Once on the ground, the dogs are trained to bring down their targets and keep them down until an arrest can be made. This conference in Johannesburg isn't as dramatic, but what countries decide here could have a huge impact on the future of African elephants if they can agree what to do. Namibia, Zimbabwe and other southern African countries believe hunting and selling off ivory stocks will pay for conservation. But Kenya and 28 other countries want all ivory trade banned.
Kenya's philosophy has always been that you can get much more financial benefit with a live animal.
Tackling the poaching crisis takes a lot more than this. Organised crime bosses also need to be brought down, and buyers in Asia persuaded to stop. Alistair Leithhead, BBC News, Johannesburg.
Here, West Ham have been accused of breaking Football Association rules on discrimination by the chairman of the club's ladies' team. Stephen Hunt has lodged a formal complaint with the FA after months of argument over funding and facilities. West Ham claim Hunt has threatened the club and refused to align with their principles. Our sports correspondent Catherine Downs reports.
Under the streetlights, West Ham ladies training by the side of the road. They've been told they're not allowed to warm up in the West Ham gym anymore. It's not just access to facilities that's a problem. They say West Ham have stopped them finding their own sponsors and they're short on funds because they had to buy their own kit. They claim West Ham had promised a cheque to cover the costs.
According to the people who run West Ham ladies, the money hasn't come through and West Ham have stopped answering their emails. As a result, the ladies' team can't afford a physio, they can't afford a bus to take them to matches, and they're wearing last season's home kit with the names of last season's squad crossed out on the back.
I think West Ham have breached the underlying objectives of the FA, which is to promote equality and grassroots football at all levels. Here, West Ham are actively undermining it, and I think that's why they need to be fined, really, until they start to act like a 21st century club.
West Ham and West Ham ladies are two separate clubs, but both sides have enjoyed the benefits of mutual association. Though there's been no formal deal, West Ham have agreed to support the ladies' side with kit and facilities in the past, an agreement they're now accused of breaking. But things could be about to change. West Ham say they're dedicated to equality in sport, but that the current arrangement with the ladies' team has simply not worked. They say they've been working for some time on plans to take West Ham United Ladies FC in-house, and in light of Mr Hunt's most recent and deeply concerning comments, they say they'll now be seeking to do so at the earliest opportunity. They say women's football at West Ham United will become bigger, better and stronger. This is what can happen when a women's team comes in-house at a Premier League club. Since 2013, Manchester City women's team has been part of the men's club, sharing facilities and, importantly, funding. They're the reigning Super League champions. Perhaps the future looks as promising for West Ham ladies now. But after a row that's lasted months, their chairman says he'll need assurances from the club before he believes his squad will no longer be training on the streets. Catherine Downs, BBC News, Romford.
And every day this week, Sports Day on the BBC News channel will be examining a different aspect of women in sport. That's from 6:30 tonight. The United States have beaten Europe 17 points to 11 to clinch golf's Ryder Cup for the first time since 2008. Europe had gone into the final day at Hazeltine trailing the hosts, but looked set for a comeback. That was until Patrick Reed beat Rory McIlroy in the first of 7 US victories. Our sports correspondent Andy Swiss sent this report from Minnesota.
It was the champagne moment for which they'd waited so long. 8 years after their last victory party, once again the US could celebrate. But earlier it had seemed anything but certain as the two-star players Rory McIlroy and Patrick Reed locked horns in a spellbinding opening match. The American fans hardly needed firing up, but McIlroy was happy to oblige. Whatever he did though, Reed matched. This was finger-wagging fireworks, and it was the American who came out on top. Briefly, Europe threatened a Medina-style miracle as wins for their two outstanding debutants, Thomas Pieters and Rafa Cabrera-Bello, closed the gap to just 1 point. But from there, the US momentum was unstoppable. Ricky Fowler edging out Justin Rose before the winning moment went to Ryan Moore, only picked a week ago. Not a bad way to make your mark. The US had been billed as favourites, and how they delivered. Their biggest margin of victory for 35 years. Europe's inexperienced team simply swept away.
I think we're going in a great direction. The veteran players have showed these younger players what we want them to do for the next 20 years. So hopefully they can carry it on.
Europe have had an unbelievable run of winning that battle on the greens, and I think this week the Americans it's gone their way this week. And when you're dealing with players of such high standard, the differences are marginal, and that's what's happened.
And so after 3 defeats in a row, at last the US team and their fans can celebrate. The Ryder Cup regained in emphatic style. Andy Swiss, BBC News, Hazeltine.
The Monty Python actor and director Terry Jones has been given a rapturous welcome at his first public appearance since announcing he has dementia. He was being honoured last night in Cardiff, where he was given a BAFTA Cymru Award for his work in film and television.
The recipient of the 2016 BAFTA Award for his outstanding contribution to film and television is Terry Jones.
At an emotional ceremony, a standing ovation for the man who's made us laugh for 50 years. Presenting him with the BAFTA Cymru Award, his Python co-star and friend, Michael Palin.
For me it was emotional because I love the guy, you know, and we've done so much together, and we've worked, he's helped me out of so many scrapes, he's helped me make jokes, he's helped us write sketches, he's helped us write shows. He's a brilliant and intelligent guy who's taught me an awful lot. We still have a drink together. There's so much that we still enjoy.
A director, documentary maker and author, but for many the name Terry Jones is synonymous with Monty Python.
Good evening. Good evening. And where do you come from? Oh, yeah. Dunfermline in Scotland. Well, let me introduce you, Mr. John Smith. Mr. Jasma.
A month after announcing he's suffering from progressive aphasia, a form of dementia which affects his ability to communicate, his son Bill, clearly emotional, helped him to collect the award.
Just struggles we're having at the moment is a bit hard, but we're so proud of you. Thank you.
Ever the comedian, Terry Jones still managed to raise a laugh.
Monty Python, the Flying Circus.
He directed Monty Python's Life of Brian and The Meaning of Life, but the award also marked his work as a historian and documentary maker. An emotional evening for a man described at the ceremony as a national treasure. One of the most powerful hurricanes for a decade is moving across the Caribbean. Hurricane Matthew could bring winds of more than 150 miles an hour when it hits land this evening. Parts of Jamaica have already been lashed by rain and strong winds, but Haiti is expected to suffer the most damage. Katrina Renton reports.
This is what happens when Matthew comes to visit. The hurricane had this impact when it was still more than 200 miles off the Jamaican coast, bringing torrential rain to the streets of Kingston. And the worst is yet to come. Hurricane Matthew is the strongest storm to menace the Caribbean since 2007. At one point, it briefly reached Category 5, the top hurricane classification. Now it's weakened a little to Category 4 as it passes the Jamaican coast. But it's Haiti that's expected to feel its full force. The gales have already started, but Matthew is expected to reach land in the southwest of the island later today. People here are getting ready for winds of around 150 miles per hour and up to 64 centimetres of rain, which could trigger life-threatening landslides and floods.
It's very important for everyone to respect all the warnings from authorities. The messages we give you are for your well-being, and you should evacuate the areas that are in danger.
Haiti is the poorest country in the Americas, and there's fear about the damage Matthew could cause.
Economically, we are not ready to prepare for the storm. As you can see, everyone is on the street looking for ways to survive. People just cannot stay in their homes.
And in Cuba, where the hurricane is expected tomorrow, preparations for this unwanted guest are being made.
Now we're removing everything, like the traffic lights, because of the hurricane.
We're standing in this queue, waiting to buy food and other useful things that we'll need for this hurricane.
After Cuba, it will head towards the Bahamas. All are hoping Matthew will move on quickly, leaving as little chaos behind as possible. Katrina Renton, BBC News.
A look at what's happening a little closer to home now. Here's Matt Taylor with the forecast.
Certainly have. We'll start though with Hurricane Matthew. You saw the pictures there in Jamaica. They were the outer bands of the storm, in fact, way out to the west of the core of the storm, which at the moment has winds circulating very tightly around the centre of that, around 130 miles an hour. Now, that strong core looks like it will set to pass just to the west of Haiti as we go through tonight. Could see as much as a metre worth of rain across Haiti, moving on then to eastern Cuba and the Bahamas, and even by Wednesday it could still be a major hurricane. From there on, it pushes up the western Atlantic, staying well away from us, having no direct impact on our weather through this coming week. In fact, for hours, very quiet conditions this morning. Almost picture-perfect autumn weather. Slight frost in places, a little bit of mist and fog. The mist and fog not as much of a feature through the rest of this week as the breeze picks up, but most will see sunshine, and for most it will be dry. Rain-bearing clouds at the moment being kept to the west of us, high pressure across Scandinavia. This could just bring the odd spot of rain towards the west of Ireland and maybe across the Hebrides, but for the vast majority it is a dry Monday. Bit of a breeze blowing across the northwest highlands of Scotland, but across the rest of Scotland some good sunny spells, a little bit hazy in places, coolest along the east coast where the wind's coming in off the sea, temperatures in the mid to high teens further west. And we'll get that slight east-west split further south. The wind's not quite as strong across eastern England, which means with the sunshine overhead it actually feels pretty warm out there in that sun. More of a breeze though towards the southwest of England, but even here we'll see temperatures peak at around 17 or 18 Celsius through the afternoon. Now tonight, most will stay dry. Notice the rain-bearing clouds still staying off towards the west, and that's because we've got a developing southeast wind. What that will mean is not as much fog across Lincolnshire, northeast England, eastern parts of Scotland. The fog will be limited to the hills, say the Peak District, the eastern side of the Pennines, and temperatures, because of the breeze, will not fall away so much. And the reason the breeze is getting a bit strong is this developing area of low pressure in the Bay of Biscay. With high pressure not moving across Scandinavia, it starts to squeeze the isobars together, starts to pick up the wind strength. So a bit more of a breeze tomorrow. That will clear the morning cloud from those eastern hills in northern England, eastern Scotland. Good long sunny spells throughout the day. Small chance of a shower in Northern Ireland, but the vast majority, you stick dry, you stick sunny. And because the breeze has picked up a little bit, might not feel quite as warm in the sunshine as it does this afternoon. Breeze picks up further for Wednesday. That brings in slightly more cloud to eastern areas to begin with, but the breeze will be enough to break that up at times to allow some sunny spells. Vast majority staying dry once again, and temperatures starting to drop away a little bit by day, and also by night starting to become a little less cold. So for the rest of the week, not a huge amount of changes. Yes, the breeze picks up, but most will stick with the dry and sunny weather. There's more details on the weather for the week ahead on the BBC Weather website, and we've got an update, of course, throughout the day on what's happening with Hurricane Matthew. Simon.
Matt, thank you very much. A reminder of our top story this lunchtime. The Chancellor, Philip Hammond, has been outlining his plans to boost the economy. He said trying to balance the books can wait. That's all from us. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. From me, good afternoon.